Welcome to BizTech's Marketing Show. Now, our guest for today is Matthew Crabb. He's the Regional Trends Director, Asia Pacific at Mintel Group. Mintel is one of the world's leading market intelligence agencies. Now, to tell us more about Mintel, welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you very much for your welcome. It's great to be talking to you today.
Now, Matt, for a start, could you give us an overview of Mintel and its history?
Sure. Well, Mintel's been around a long time. We're actually celebrating our 50th year in business. We were set up in 1972. And basically, we've grown our business since then and become essentially one of the world's leading market intelligence agencies. Essentially, what our vision is to be the expert in what consumers want and why. So our analysis is of consumers, markets, new products, competitive landscapes, and local and global economies. So essentially, what we do is we put together different types of content, really designed for different client needs. So, for example, we have our core product, which is called Global New Products Database. And that essentially gathers thousands of products from around the world on a daily basis, so that we can see how what new products are coming into the market, what are the new features of those products. And we don't just look at the products in isolation. We think about, well, why are those products coming out? What is it? Where is the consumer need that these new products are trying to facilitate? So on top of the Global New Products Database, we also have Mintel reports. Now, these give a 360 view of different categories, different markets in different countries. We have different styles of reports to suit different markets. So, for example, in the US, UK, China, and Brazil, we have these very comprehensive reports that include market sizes, that sort of thing, as well as the consumer research. And in markets like, say, for example, India and Thailand, we have more compact reports that really focus in on consumer need and how that drives innovation in those markets. On top of that, we also look at specific categories. So we have platforms for beauty, personal care, and household. We have a platform for food and drink. My particular area of focus is on Mintel Trends. Now, that's very specifically looking at changes in consumer behavior for me in Asia Pacific, but we look globally, and we're looking at different factors that change consumer behavior, whether that's macro factors like the economy, it could be legislation, it can be changes in consumer need, it can be cultural, it can be social, so on and so forth. And we look at that and track that by doing consumer research globally in 36 countries. So that's the global consumer product that we have. And then we also have, on top of the reports and the platforms, we have other services we have developed over the years. There's a product in Australia called Purchase Intelligence. We do marketing research. We research things like patents. So globally, we're looking at a lot of different stuff, and this is all built up over the last 50 years. We're now, I think, about 1,500 people or more globally, and we've grown really rapidly. We've probably doubled our numbers in Asia Pacific in the last couple of years, I think. So give you an idea of how rapidly we've grown as a business.
Now, Matthew, this is really interesting. Now, in terms of your customer base, I would assume that it's a mix of advertising agencies as well as direct clients as well.
Yes, it is. So essentially, we start with the FMCG, the fast-moving consumer goods companies. That's where our focus is. So we work with a lot of some of the biggest clients in the world in that space. But you're right. Yes, we do also work with agencies and work with them in terms of developing strategies for their engagement with their clients. And they rely on us a lot of the time for information about how markets are changing and so on. So obviously different clients have different needs and different approaches necessary for us, hence the breadth of different types of content and information services that we provide. And it's really, adapted not just on a global scale, because we have different products in different regions to suit local markets. And this is the most important thing, is like, if you're doing something that works in the UK, it's not necessarily going to translate well to, say, for example, China or Thailand or Malaysia. You really need to adapt the product offering to the clients in those markets.
Now, Matthew, you just mentioned China, because you have a very interesting background. You co-founded Access Asia, a research company which focused on China, which you actually subsequently sold to Mintel. Tell us about the Chinese consumer and how it's evolved, how they've evolved over the last decade or so.
Okay, I mean, my story with China goes a lot further back. So I studied Chinese at university and graduated in 1991. I got into the market research business 30 years ago, starting writing research reports on China, which I then developed into business with Access Asia. And did, I was running Access Asia for 13 years and sold it 11 years ago to Mintel. I mean, I remember writing a report on e-commerce in China back in 2001. And because there was this interesting, obscure little company called Alibaba had appeared on the scene. And we thought, oh, this is interesting. We started writing about it. Nobody bought the report, but essentially at the time, we had picked up on where things were going, because a lot of the big tech companies that were trying to get into China at the time missed the market. They didn't understand the market, whereas Alibaba did. Now, I think what we've seen since then, and particularly in the last decade, is that Chinese companies, understanding their local market, have been able to adapt the tech that came from elsewhere and really tailor that to their own market, which is really what we're now seeing is the Chinese tech companies really leading that. So you talk about everything from payment systems, shopping online, electric vehicles. China's way ahead, and they're continuing to accelerate. I'm not even talking about the supercomputers and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, from a consumer point of view, we know in the last 10 years, really a lot of the trends have been driven by China, but things keep changing. We're now seeing tech companies developing more new technologies, consumer technologies suited to their markets. So, for example, Grab, Gojek, all of these companies have adapted to the local market needs in Southeast Asia. So we're starting to see that proliferance of innovation in the tech area aimed at consumers, really starting to not fragment necessarily, but adapt to local markets and create new opportunities in many ways.
Okay, and then in that case, I want to zoom in then on your Mintel Global Consumer Insights Trend 2023. I think you just launched this report. I read it. I love the infographics because it really kind of enables someone to very quickly glance through key information. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about some of the key takeaways from this report.
Okay, well, maybe before I get into the takeaways, more I might talk about is how we got to those takeaways.
Okay.
So one of the things that Mintel, and I mentioned this briefly before, Mintel started doing about 3+ years ago, was research across 36 countries globally. Now, in each market globally, 13 of which are in Asia Pacific, we interview every 6 months, we interview over 1,000 people in each market. Now, what we're asking them is about their spending habits, the grocery spending habits, how they use technology, It might be about their financial situation. It might be, what kind of food and drinks that they like to eat, how they, what their beauty routines are like, and so on. Pet food, do they have pets? But also on top of that, we have questions, a series of statements actually, that they agree to or disagree with to a certain extent. So each of those represents one pillar. And now each of those, so there's 4 pillars for every driver that we have. So we have 7 consumer drivers in Mintel. And we have been tracking the changes in consumer behaviors and attitudes for at least 3 years now across the 36 markets. Now, just to give you an idea of what those are. So the 7 drivers are surroundings, well-being, technology, obviously right up your street, rights, experiences, identity, and value. So what we're looking for is changes in people's attitudes to these drivers. So say, for example, with surroundings, underneath surroundings, you've got things like sustainability, you've got localism, you've got ethics. So we're able to track those and see changes over time across all regions, not just Asia Pacific. So we use that data in terms of spotting trends, shifts over time in people's behaviors, their attitudes, and so on. At the same time, what Trends does, Mintel Trends, is we track something like 200 observations, we call them, a month in APAC. And what they are is basically we're looking at innovations in markets around the region. What they tell us is which categories are we seeing the most innovation in, which consumers are they directed at, and what are the key drivers that they appeal to. And of course, through tagging, we're able to sort of work out how those shifts, those innovations are supporting the overall trends that we have. We have got about 70 trends. So these are driven by what we see, for example, say we're talking about experiences. We have a trend called experiences all, and it's all about experiential products. So you might be talking about metaverse, for example. You could be talking about pop-up stores. We also have a trend that specifically looks at pop-up stores. It might be looking at, how people look after themselves, or opportunities for older people. So there's various different trends that's going on. So essentially what we do is each year we do an audit of the existing trends that we have and make some changes to them, but we also look to the next year based on the data we've seen. So we have 5 new trends for this year.
And what are these 5 new trends? Okay,
so a brief summary. The first one is called me mentality. Essentially, basically, people emerging from the pandemic eager to refocus on themselves. So brands have an opportunity to really help them, take center stage, if you like, and navigate through this period of reinvention of themselves. We're all in a new normal, if you like. So what does the new normal look like for me, and how do brands really engage with people on that? This leads nicely also into power for the people. So what we're talking about here is how brands have to make room for a new C in their C-suite, and that is consumers. And it's all about how brands can collaborate with consumers.
So it's around co-creation then.
So yeah, exactly. It's taking innovation out of the lab and sharing it with consumers, creating co-creation, so that you're making, essentially, you're working with your consumers, so you're not going to have so many misses, hopefully, in terms of your innovation process, because you already know, because you've worked with consumers, you already know what they want and why. So that's power to the people. The other one is hyper fatigue. So basically, this is about how people are becoming fatigued as a result of the fast pace of daily life, increased use of technology, moving from crisis to crisis, and all that sort of thing. So this is really about where brands can step in to help consumers deal with all of this stuff. And it's essentially sort of looking at mental health in particular, but also it's a very practical thing. It's like, well, how are people changing the way they live in order to sort of slow it all down, if you like. So essentially, there are many opportunities there for brands to sort of help people calm down, get better sleep, whatever it might be. So that's the third one. The fourth one is called international localism. So this is really about sort of addressing how much global uncertainty there is at the moment. You know, there's the economy, sustainability, supply chains, so on and so forth. And so what we're seeing is that there will be a greater movement towards protecting local resources and also boosting local businesses. Now, you can imagine this plays very much into the sustainability side of things, because it's encouraging brands to source locally, reduce their carbon footprint in terms of distribution, that sort of thing. But it's also about localism, supporting local communities, and therefore developing that relationship between brands and the markets that they serve. So it's more of a two-way street there.
Matthew, can I ask you, and just to interrupt you for a bit, are you seeing the same trends within, and particularly with international localism, as you mentioned? Are you seeing that across the Asia Pacific region, or only in specific markets, perhaps in the region?
We're seeing it across the region, but it's being expressed in very different ways in different markets, obviously down to local needs and so on. So, for example, since the pandemic in India, things like Ayurveda have become a really big thing. So, and people turn back to their grandmother's sort of herbal recipes and herbal remedies to protect themselves from COVID. So essentially that's created more interest in traditional foods, drinks, herbal remedies, and so on. So that's one expression of this. The other thing is, like here in Malaysia, I've seen a lot of, artisanal food brands, sauces, that sort of thing appearing in the market, where people have been at home and thought, I can make a business out of this, and started developing things. So we're starting to see a lot more creativity in terms of developing local products, using local produce and promoting that, and promoting the fact that it is local, that it is sourced locally. And often or not, there's extra tags to these developments, such as, it's organic, it's natural, it's sustainable, so on and so forth. So this also then feeds back into this idea of the new C on the C-suite, bringing consumers into that co-creation situation with brands.
And the fifth point really is around intentional spending, isn't it?
Correct. So this is really talking about this whole interplay of people's shifts in terms of what they mean by value post-pandemic. So one of the things that we're seeing is that people aren't necessarily spending less money, but they're making harder choices how they're spending that money. Now, once they've got the necessities out of the way, what they're spending their money on is more higher quality products. So they're buying fewer things, but better quality things. Therefore, they're not necessarily cutting back or buying cheap, is the point.
But there are brands, Matthew, that are actually bucking that trend. Shein, the fast-moving, fast fashion brand, it kind of bucks that overall trend, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Personally, I think that kind of model has a limited shelf life now. I think people are increasingly worried about how things like fast fashion are unsustainable. And I think that's one of the key things that, this idea of value is not just about quality or convenience. It's also about what are the broader values. Now, this could be practical values, the abilities I like to call them, things like durability, flexibility, adaptability, but also sustainability, ethics, and so on. So increasingly people, their understanding of value is no longer just about price. It's about what are the quality and qualities that a product offers them. What are the practical benefits they get out of that product? Is it worth the money? And I think the more things you tick in terms of, different needs that people have, is it durable? can I use it in many different ways? Say, for example, a great example recently I've seen is from Australia, the Farmers Union yogurt brand. They were marketing how they could, consumers could use their product, not just in the normal way in desserts or whatever, but you can make sauces with it. So the whole idea is that there are many more ways you can use that product. And if you can get consumers to understand that quality, then it becomes much more valuable to them. And therefore the price, if the price goes up, that's beyond your control, that's inflation. But if you're still able to get that message across that, hey, this product, you can use it in so many different ways, and it's really adaptable, it's got a long shelf life, whatever it is, that you can see as a benefit to consumers, you can combine that. And hey, if you can throw in, well, it's a sustainable product, we run an ethical business here, these are all add-ons that help to sell that idea of quality to consumers.
Now, Matthew, then it's fascinating, these Consumer Trend Insights 2023. Based on all of this, what would you advise brands and marketeers out there to be cognizant of in 2023?
Well, it's a process. Understanding trends is a process. It never stops. People are constantly changing. So, these are global trends. They'll express themselves, as I mentioned before, they will express themselves very differently in different markets. Now, within those markets, say for example, here in Malaysia, those trends will play out differently according to the demographic groups that you're talking about, what their income level is, how old they are, do they have kids or not, so on and so forth. So all of these will constantly be, there's no sort of average. So you really need to understand your consumer and how these trends, these macro trends are influencing consumers. And of course, to complicate things further, things change with time. So, I'm a consumer like everybody else. So when I'm choosing to buy a product, I'm influenced by many different things at the same time. So, I could be standing in front of 2 convenience stores and I don't have any cash on me. Now, one convenience store I know has the ability to use e-wallets, so I'll choose that one. So that's about technology. That's the driver at that point. But maybe I think that another convenience store has a better ambiance, it's a more chic place, or it's more relaxed. So maybe that's where I'll go, because I want to have a more relaxed experience. So experiences is playing. So what you can see here is that actually the different drivers play on an individual according to the occasion, essentially. And of course, those change over time. Those needs change over time. So I think the important thing is to understand that we're always changing all the time, even though you can't necessarily see it, it's incremental. But people are constantly changing. People are getting new influences, new technologies are coming in, and that changes how people behave. So all of the time, I think the key thing is to keep on looking at your consumers, trying to understand how they're changing, what their need states are, and how those needs are changing. It's a constant thing. It really is. And if you take your eye off that, then you lose a vision of what's really going on in the market and what the consumer really wants and why, essentially.
Matthew, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I've really learned a lot. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with? Well,
I work for a market research company, so obviously I'm going to say, well, come to us and do your market research, because that's the only way you'll know how to, what consumers are, how they're changing and their need states. But I think the fundamental is understanding. We get a lot of people, in our client companies coming to us and saying, well, what about the future? And that's what we're trying to predict. And the only way you can really understand the future is from the past and seeing the trends, the shifts over time. That's the important thing. If you're planning ahead, if you're in charge of strategy for your company, and you need to think, well, what's our product portfolio going to look like in 5 years' time? You need to do your research. You need to be able to look back, to look forward. And that really is crucial, because of course there are many things, many unknowns in the future, of course, but there are many knowns that we can use to predict. and even forecast out the outlying events. So I think the crucial thing really is understanding that shift in consumer over time. It's not just about the here and now. The here and now is fine for tactical stuff, but if you really want to think about your business strategy, you need to be thinking longer term.
And I think looking back to look forward is really a good piece of advice. Matthew, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Brian.
We've been speaking to Matthew Crabb, the Regional Trends Director, Asia Pacific at Mintel Group. I'm Brian Fernandez, and this has been BizTech's Marketing Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.